Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and a lot of people have been asking me about the movie 1917 and what I thought of it and how it was. Well, it took me a while to actually have a chance to watch it, but having done that now, I want to take a few minutes to talk about what it did well and what it maybe could have improved upon. Although it sounds incredibly arrogant for me to take a movie like 1917 and pontificate on where it could have been better. Overall, I'll just get this right out at the beginning, it's a fantastic film. If you're at all interested in World War I, war movies, it's absolutely worth your time. It's a great movie, and it deserves all of the accolades that it has gotten, critically and in awards and just in popular respect. It's excellent. One of the things that I consider myself very lucky to have been able to do is visit a bunch of actual World War I battlefields, and also, of course, look at pictures from the period. Although it's worth pointing out, a lot of the pictures of World War I battlefields come from a couple years after the fact. They hadn't necessarily been cleaned up all that much by that point, but there is some difference. But when you're able to look at a bunch of pictures of basically at the time battlefields from World War I, and then also see the state of them today, and artifacts, if you study it enough, especially on site, I think you kind of can start to get a picture for what those places would have actually looked like during the Great War. And I think it's a hard thing to do. There are some elements to it. Barbed wire is the one that really comes to mind that we just don't have a context for today. And it's hard to, you don't often see pictures of the barbed wire in World War I because it's not something that was really accessible to photographers. If you're a photographer in World War I and you stand up and mosey on out to the wire to get some pictures, you're going to get shot. You know, people don't go there. And so there isn't as much photographic evidence of that. And you can get an intellectual feel, in theory, for what the wire was like. But I think it's very difficult to really understand what they meant by barbed wire, which is tens, if not sometimes hundreds of yards of an absolute rat's nest of rusty, tangled, mud-encrusted barbed wire. And that's something that even in the fairly early scenes in 1917, they do a fantastic job of portraying, I think, what the battlefield was really like to go across. Pictures are one thing, but it takes a film to really convey how difficult this terrain was to move in. They do a really good job of some of the little details, like the two main characters walking across muddy duckboards and slipping with every step. And like they're on a path between two big shell craters full of gas-infected water, you know, at the bottom full of corpses. And you're cringing there, like one slip and they're going down into that shell hole and they may not be able to get back out. And that's the reality of parts of World War I. And I think the film does an outstanding job of portraying that. It also, I think, does a really good job of showing what the trenches looked like. I've seen some complaints about the lack of zigzags of crenellations in the trenches. I think in some areas, I think that's justified. Towards the end of the movie, some of the later settings, they look a little sketchier to me. The conceit is that these were trenches that were just very recently dug, like overnight, and I don't know about that. The early scenes where they show British trenches and German trenches, they did a great job of portraying what those actually looked like, how they were occupied by men, and even things like the difference between the British trenches and the German ones. The Germans had been deliberately building defensive lines, and so they put a lot more structural work into their trenches than the Entente powers did. The French and the British were always of this mindset of, we're here to get out of these trenches and move forward. And for the Germans, it was, all we have to do is consolidate our gains. If we can advance further, great, but this is just defending and staying here is effectively a victory. And so the Germans had, in many ways, much better trench systems. So I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but of course the basic storyline is these two soldiers have been sent to cross no man's land and link up with another British unit to prevent an attack. That's not giving anything away. And so in the process, they encounter British trenches and German trenches that you get to see. And the other element that I really like is how it shows the contrast between the areas of no man's land and the trenches and where the fighting was actually happening, and also areas that weren't under constant fighting. Everyone thinks of World War I as, muddy, shell-pocked, horrible nightmare no man's land. But in reality, this is a relatively small area, and shells were valuable, and they weren't just launched randomly into places that weren't actually really frontline battlefield areas, unless there was a very specific reason to do so. So you didn't have to get that far out from the trenches to be in areas of like intact farm field and trees and forests. And they show that, which is really cool. Now, the thing that I think is a little bit, I don't really like the way that it came out in the film is I feel like it contracts the distances between places. So, of course, one of the big technical features of 1917 is this idea that it was filmed entirely to look like one continuous shot. Now, it's not, of course, but the editing is done very carefully and very well to hide the cuts between scenes. And unfortunately, in one way, I kind of think the film is better if you don't know that going in, because if you know it going in, you're kind of looking for it and you're paying attention to like, oh, how did they film this? How's the camera working on this? Where are the cuts? And that, to my mind, that detracts from the experience and the story of the film. If you went in not knowing that, I think it works better, and the camera work kind of fades into the background and you don't notice it, and it's just a tool for better telling the story and keeping you engaged with these two British soldiers. But of course, that technical work is a huge feat of technical videography, cinematography, and I totally understand why everyone involved is super proud of it and wants to share it, wants to talk about it. And I get that, it is. Unfortunately, I think it's a thing that would be better talked about after you've watched the film, and you can go back and watch it a second time and really pay attention to how the cinematography was done. Anyway, the point I was getting at was I think that this technique contracts the space. So in order to take what is basically 24 hours of real time and compress it into like an hour and a half or 2 hours, I don't remember the exact runtime, of what looks like real time, things have to be normally you get cuts. Like, okay, they're walking out the end of this German trench and now they're going to go across a mile of farm fields and we'll catch up with them at the other side. But the film technique doesn't allow them to do that. We have to follow these two guys every step of the way. And so what you get is it actually looks like, well, they go like 200 yards past the end of the German trenches, and now they're in this totally different environment. And they get on some trucks for 5 minutes, and they've gone way farther than you actually could in the time frame. Transitions, things like going between rest and recuperation areas behind the lines to the second trench, and then up to the front trench, and then into no man's land. These distances are compressed in an unrealistic way. Like, if they were really as close as the movie makes them feel, all of the rear areas would be under constant artillery attack because they're well within range and they're observable. And you see this kind of throughout the whole film. And that was the one thing that kind of grated on me and I understand, like, there's really no way around it if you're using this one-shot style of filming, which that is a huge boon to the film, but it has this unfortunate side effect in my mind. There's a town in there. Like, well, you get to the town really fast, and it just seems a little bit weird to me. I have seen, there are a number of technical quibbles, like, why are the two main guys wearing their gas masks on their back the whole time? They ought to be wearing it on the front. That was really heavily ingrained in troops. To my mind, those issues are minimal enough that it doesn't bother me all that much. There is an argument to be made that the whole defining purpose of the movie, like that these two guys would be sent on this mission, is fundamentally unrealistic, that a message like that would have been conveyed by an aircraft dropping a message on the intended recipients. And there's some validity to that too, but I'm willing to overlook that sort of problem as just, this is the premise of the movie, let's accept it and use it as a vehicle to experience a story of the Great War, where all of the individual elements of this story, I think, are really quite plausible. And it's remarkable and very impressive to see them all put together in a film like this. Sam Mendes, the director, did a fantastic job. All of the actors did, I think, exceptional jobs. It's kind of fun to have the two main characters not be box office superstars, but if you've watched a bunch of British film, or just film in general, you'll see a lot of well-known, notable actors show up as basically little side roles as officers or other people that these two main characters run into. And so I enjoyed seeing that, although it's not really relevant to the story of the film itself. Anyway, there isn't that much weapon-related content in 1917, which may be counterintuitive to some people, but what little there was, I think, was pretty well done. Yeah, I really enjoyed the film. Well, I really appreciated the film. It's not necessarily a movie that you're going to go out and watch, for the lulz. It's not a comedy. It is a somewhat heavy movie with a lot to say, I think, about World War I itself. It really was a very, frankly, it was an unnecessary and hugely tragic affair on a world scale. At any rate, if you want to get more of a feeling about what that was like to actually be in, 1917 is certainly one element that is a part of that understanding. Also, of course, hugely recommend Peter Jackson's restored footage documentary as well. So anyway, that is my take on 1917. Hopefully, well, I'll tell you what, let me know what you guys thought. If there's anything else that you thought was particularly well done or should have been improved, let me know down in the comments. And thanks for watching.